Hello and welcome to this review of Croc Legend of the Gobbos for the PS1. But wait a minute, where am I, you might be asking? Well, I've recently bought a house with my girlfriend and so I've actually moved game rooms. It's took us a while to get this set up and it's not completely finished yet, but for the meantime I think it looks pretty good. What do you think? Anyway, why am I reviewing this game as a Christmas special episode, you might be asking? Well, it's simply because this is a game that happens to have a memorable snow level for me, so I figured I might as well review it now. Let's pop it in and take a look. Croc Legend of the Gobbos, or just Croc as I'll be referring to it from now on, is a PS1 3D platformer developed by Argonaut Software and released in 1997, making it a reasonably early PS1 game, being released at a similar time to Crash Bandicoot 2. Croc notoriously started development as a Yoshi game, which probably would have ended up being released on the N64 and was gonna be published by Nintendo. The reason for this is that Argonaut Software are the team responsible for developing the Super FX chip, which allowed the SNES to display primitive 3D graphics, and they also co-developed the game that makes most use of this Super FX chip, Star Fox. Argonaut Software clearly knew the stuff and were extremely capable of creating not only video game software, but hardware too. So what happened to tarnish the relationship with Nintendo? Well, I don't think anyone really knows the specifics of what happened between these two companies. Maybe Nintendo just didn't see a use for them, with them having plans for the N64 and Super Mario 64. But either way, before Argonaut's relationship with Nintendo ended, they pitched a game which would have featured Yoshi as the main character to them. But Nintendo, despite initially liking the concept, scrapped the whole thing and left Argonaut in the dark. Argonaut Software then teamed up with Fox Interactive, who would act as a publisher on their repurposed Yoshi game, now featuring a new character called Croc, and would release it on the PS1 and PC, with plans to turn Croc into a multimedia franchise. Obviously this Croc media empire didn't come to fruition, but at least we did get a couple more games in the Croc series before it became a dead franchise. Croc is a 3D platformer which tells the story of an abandoned crocodile who is taken in by a species called Gobbos. The Gobbos raise the crocodile as one of their own and live out their lives in harmony. One day, however, the evil Dante appears and captures all of the Gobbos, including the King Gobbo who acted as Croc's father figure. Before being captured, the King Gobbo rings a gong which calls down a bird who flies Croc away to safety before he can be captured, and it's then up to him to rescue his friends and his foster father from Dante. It's a really basic story setup, but where it excels is in its cuteness levels. The graphics are extremely colourful and bright, and the interactions between Croc and the Gobbos is just delightful. I particularly love the montage sequence where Croc is being taught how to walk, run and attack, and the whole thing is just really charming. I do have to say though, Dante's actual agenda here is a bit up in the air. There's no real reason for him to be capturing the Gobbos other than to just be a bit of a douche, and it would have been nice for him to have had more of an actual goal to give the experience a bit more tension. The gameplay is fairly straightforward. The way each level is structured is almost like a series of rooms, each containing a platforming section, a minigame, or sometimes a light puzzle element. In later levels there will be elements of backtracking because you'll need to get keys to unlock doors found in previous rooms. So the level design becomes more maze-like, but it never becomes too overwhelming because there's only ever really one direction to go at a time. Other than simply getting to the end of each level, you have the optional objective of finding 6 hidden Gobbos in each level. 5 of these are hidden in the normal level and simply require thorough exploration. However, the 6th Gobbo is obtained by gaining access to the coloured gem door, which is at the end of every level. To open this door, you'll have to find the 5 coloured gems hidden in the level, so the incentive for exploration is extremely high because you'll be wanting to get both the coloured gems and the Gobbos if you want to go for 100% completion. Most of the time these coloured gem doors will open up into some kind of mini-game section. Sometimes you'll have to chase a Gobbo hiding in a box, sometimes you'll have to move a pot to catch all of the falling gems, or sometimes you'll play a game of whack-a-mole, or in this situation, whack-a-sheep. These sections give the game some variety which is nice, and it's a fun distraction from the platforming in the normal levels. This minigame where you need to follow the Gobbo in a box as it moves and swaps places with other boxes is entirely the reason why I think I'm so good at this sort of game. I think Croc was the first time I had ever seen this, and I got pretty good at it if I do say so myself. In order to guide you through levels and offer you another reward for exploring is the gem collectibles, which are this game's Super Mario coin equivalent. In this game though, it actually works more like Sonic's rings, where if you get hit, you'll drop all of the gems you're carrying, and getting hit with no gems will make you lose a life, and you'll start from the beginning of the room you're in. Where this game is better than Sonic though, is how when you finish a level, your gems go into a sort of bank, and if you get 100 gems in this bank, you'll get a life. So finishing each level with as many gems as possible will result in building up the lives faster. I think this is a great mechanic and introduces a level of tension because you don't want to get hit and lose all of your gems before banking them all. Another way this game injects some variety is in its boss fights. There's 2 bosses in each world and a total of 4 worlds, meaning that there's a total of 8 bosses overall. While this should have been great to offer a challenge and for a nice change of pace, the boss fights are some of the lowest points of the entire game. Literally none of the bosses offer any form of challenge, and they're all structured exactly the same. Simply wait for them to attack, then when they enter a cooldown state, attack them, and repeat 3 times. Almost no bosses even change their attack pattern as the fight goes on either, which makes them predictable and boring. Not to mention that when you defeat them, they literally just freeze in place and don't even have a defeat animation or anything. It just looks really clunky, and I feel like a lot more effort could have been put into these fights to make them more distinct. There's only really 2 bosses that in any way break the standard formula, and that's these snow monsters which separate into smaller monsters with each hit, and this guy who throws bombs at you and you need to bounce them back at him with these springboards. The fights are still easy, but hey, at least these ones are very slightly different. Another major issue with the game is that there's elements of extremely poor game design in certain levels. For example, sometimes you'll be exploring an area and then something will force you to move to the next area, like this falling platform, and then you'll get to the end of the level only to discover that you've missed something in the area you were exploring before the platform fell. But of course, after the platform falls down, you've got no way of backtracking to the previous area, forcing you to play the whole level again. There was also this part here where you need to pick between these 3 doors by blowing one up using this balloon monster, but only one of the doors has the coloured gem door behind it, so if you pick the wrong one, you're forced to do the level again to get 100% because you can't backtrack. Don't get me wrong, you can backtrack in a lot of levels, but in these particular instances where you're stopped from doing so, it becomes a real nuisance. It just feels a bit insulting at times, and like the developers were actively wasting your time, and it's not appreciated. What makes the situation worse is that say you got all 5 coloured gems and 5 out of 6 of the Gobbos, if you were to replay that level, you don't need to just get the 1 Gobbo you missed, but you'll need to get everything all over again. It's like replaying the level resets everything back to square one. So it's not even just a matter of replaying the levels when something like this happens, but 100% in the level all over again. By far the worst part of the game for this is the desert levels, where almost all of the coloured gem bonus areas are these stupid race levels where you need to beat a ghost to a key in order to rescue a Gobbo in a cage. The problem here is that if the ghost gets to the key first, you can't just die and try again, because if you do that, the key won't respawn, meaning that you'll have to 100% the entire level again just to give the race a second go. It's awful and would have been so easily solved by just having the key respawn if you die. My advice here would be to just fall off of the edge if you suspect that you aren't going to win the race, but make sure you do it before the ghost collects the key. That way the ghost will respawn and the key won't have disappeared, therefore giving you a second chance. While I've been talking about the negatives of this game for quite a while now, that is all of the major negative points out of the way. So, let's talk about some of the things I do like. One of this game's greatest aspects is just how goddamn cute it is. All of Croc's animations are really endearing, even his run cycle is charming, but what really hits home the cute factor is Croc's voice acting. Whenever he attacks or ground pounds, he'll let out a phrase, and it never stops being entertaining. Then there's stuff like how happy he is when he's flying using a balloon. And then there's the delightful noise he makes when he hoists himself up onto a platform. I just find it really charming, and it's great attention to detail that he has this many voice clips for each of his actions. Speaking of attention to detail, I think one of the main reasons I think of this game when I think of snow levels is, well, number one, because there's a whole snow world and not just one level, and number two, because there's so much snow-themed music to go along with the levels, but thirdly, I really like how Croc leaves footprints in the snow when he runs on it, and the noise it makes is just really oddly satisfying. It can't just be me that thinks that, right? The graphics in Croc are pretty good, not amazing but by no means bad either. While most of the levels look fairly basic and kind of video gamey, you'll find yourself going through many different environments even while exploring one level, so it never really becomes visually boring even if it is a little bit uninspired. An aspect of the game that looks particularly bad though is the skyboxes. They just look really flat and static, and it's obvious they're just 2D images, and it actually lets the visuals down quite a lot. Still though, the 4 different themes going from grassy to snow to desert to a castle mix things up enough, and the game isn't super long either, so it's fine really. But while the graphics are kind of average, the music is way better than it has any right to be. While a lot of the tracks feature the same overarching melody, it's remixed in a ton of different styles depending on the environment, and it's just fantastic. And I guarantee that after playing you'll be able to hum several tracks featured in the game. Plus, does anybody else think that this section of the Super Mario 3D World theme sounds oddly similar to this section of the Croc theme? It can't just be me that's noticed this, right? They do sound extremely similar, don't they? I suppose one aspect of the game that a lot of people would be turned off by is the controls, because yes, like a lot of early PS1 games, Croc uses tank controls. To be honest though, these are some of the most fluid tank controls that I've ever used, and I think the reason for this is because while you're in the air, Croc will strafe left and right when you press the left or right arrows, rather than rotating like he does if he's on the ground. This gives you a lot of precision in your jumps and allows you to position yourself easily, where in other games with this control method, you'd be having to move backwards and forwards to 3-point turn your way out of situations. There's also a quick turn button which gives the game that little bit more fluidity too. So all in all, I wouldn't be put off by the controls in the slightest. I found myself making precise jumps across small platforms with ease and without worrying about it. It just feels natural. Now the question is, you've gone through the entire game and rescued every Gobbo and achieved 100%, what do you get as a reward for this? Well, the answer is that you unlock a secret 5th world which consists of 5 levels, 4 of which are hard versions of different areas from each of the 4 worlds you've completed up until now. This is pretty cool, and these levels are by far the hardest in the whole game, so it's good you unlock something this challenging for getting 100%. But then the 5th level is a boss fight against some random crystal guy who has no impact on the story and just kinda comes out of nowhere. The boss fight is perhaps one of the most interesting in the entire game, having you jump onto spinning platforms to ring 4 gongs around the arena to smash the crystal guy, but it's still a bit lame and far too easy and anticlimactic. The secret ending is even disappointing, just having Croc pick up one of the gems that the crystal guy turned into and then teleporting away. Like I say, it's a bit lame and it isn't worth the trouble of collecting everything in the game for. I honestly think just unlocking some kind of skin for Croc to use to replay the game with would have been a better reward here. The actual main ending after you beat Dante is decent enough though. After beating him, you set the King Gobbo free and go back to your village where the Gobbos erect a statue of Croc and celebrate by dancing and having a party. I mean, that's it, there's nothing more to it. But that's really all you need at the end of the day. I guess one thing you do get for getting 100% is this message from the developers saying Croc will return, which would have been quite cool at the time and shows how confident the developers were that Croc was going to be a hit. They must have been extremely proud of this game, and to be honest, despite its flaws, it's easy to see why. It's not the best game ever made, far from it, but it's an enjoyable time and it's just one of those games that you can pop in and play without really having to think about it. It's got a lot of charm in its presentation and has a lot of care put into it, which comes across in things like how there's a cutscene before and after every single boss, showing Dante creating the monsters out of innocent creatures, and then after defeating them, showing Croc interact with the creature. Plus, the music is amazing and catchy, the sound design is great, and even the controls are pretty good, especially considering that the tank controls. I'm giving Croc, Legend of the Gobbos, a 6 out of 10. Really, what lets the game down is its extremely poor boss battles and aspects of its level design, which not only force you to replay levels, but force you to 100% levels all over again. The graphics aren't too good, but the animations are pretty good, which makes up for it in my opinion, and the story is extremely basic, but well presented, which again makes up for it. The combat is extremely basic too, almost every enemy is beaten with a single tail whip attack, so it's not very involving in that way. But the game does a decent enough job at introducing gimmicks into the platforming, with stuff like falling platforms, monkey bars, ice physics, and all the usual stuff. It even has underwater areas, which I've not even talked about, but that's because there's only like 3 rooms in the whole game where it's underwater, and to be honest, it's not really worth talking about. Sure, all of these gimmicks are fairly uninspired looking back on it today, and are things present in literally every platformer ever, but it still gets the job done. Basically, the bottom line here is that it's a good game, but a bit basic and flawed in several ways. Still enjoyable though, and worth your time if you enjoy platformers. So that's Croc. As I mentioned earlier in the video, the game did eventually get a sequel, simply titled Croc 2, I know, very imaginative, but the sequel substantially changed the formula from the original game, offering a much more expanded experience. However, I do remember much preferring the original game to this sequel, despite it being more basic. But I've not played the sequel in years, and in fact I've only just repurchased it, so I should probably check it out at some point. Let me know in the comments if that's something you would like to see, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye!